And welcome. Well, we're live, and today we have a joke for you, but it's not a design joke, or is it? How do you find Will Smith in the snow? You look for fresh prints. Ah ha 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 ha. Ha. So. Welcome to Design Careers Network's show, Get That UX Job. Design Career Network is an experience design channel teaching designers how to enhance their careers and land a unique job that you're best suited for. I am Andy Galpern. I'm the producer and the host today, and I'm also a senior UX growth designer, a content strategist, and a producer. I've worked for countless startups and large organizations on both product and marketing design, including Adobe and Google, to name a few. And I also help companies grow their brand and their audience. Now, I also started Cascade SF, which many of you possibly are familiar with, which is a design org based out in San Francisco. And I'm always happy to help designers succeed in their career, or just anybody who's creating for design. I want you to succeed. So that's why we're here. And today we welcome Matt May. Matt, welcome. Oh yeah, there you go, Matt. Hi. Matt is the head of inclusive design at Adobe. He's been at Adobe since 2007, where he started out as an accessibility engineer. Then eventually he moved into a more of an evangelist role. And currently Matt leads a team that trains and provides expertise to Adobe staff of all areas of product on how to build accessible products and create an inclusive work environment. He trains people around the world on accessibility and inclusivity, spanning 3 continents. And now we are focusing on Matt. Welcome.
Hello. Good to see you, Andy, and thanks for having me here, and thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thank you. Yeah, people are still hopping on, so we'll still get started and continue with our normal schedule. But here's how we'll work today, just so everybody knows. We have basically the introduction, which we just did, and then Matt will give a talk. And then from that talk, we'll go ahead and we'll have a Q&A session to where you can get your questions answered from Matt. And I will let Matt take the stage from now.
All right. Well, thanks. And I was looking at what to talk about here, and I know I have about half an hour to talk before there's some Q&A, and was looking at something that we use to train our own designers at Adobe. And I started grabbing little pieces of it, and then I started grabbing larger pieces of it, and then I decided, you know what, I'm going to try doing basically 2.5 hours of inclusive design training in a half an hour. So this is going to move fast, and I want to just cover kind of the range of what we're talking about when we talk about inclusive design, so that we can get a picture of that, and then maybe we can talk about some of the career-related issues that are involved in it. So this is how I start out every one of my presentations. This quote, which is normally misattributed to McLuhan, of "we shape our tools and then the tools shape us." And this is something I want every designer to be to be aware of, to remember as you're creating this all of these tools and materials about that are out there in the world, that these artifacts have a story. They come from somewhere, and we tend to forget our agency in that as designers. And so I want this I want this idea to sort of permeate the work that everybody is doing. We are at the same time the creators, and also building on top of the histories that are behind us. And some of that's good, a lot of it's bad. And what I've found is a lot of a lot of design schools, a lot of people that have gotten into it have gotten more into the what, the how, and not enough into the why. And so that tends to be a lot of the work that we do in inclusive design, just to provide some of the context of how do we get here? What are the ways that we exclude people? How do we think about the creation of tools that bring more people into the fabric of the social networks that we're creating, of the experiences that we're creating. And I gravitated to inclusive design coming from the world of accessibility, coming from the disabilities world, and it kind of grew, as a term, it grew out of disability. So we have to honor the heritage of disability in the term of inclusive design. And there's a lot about that I'll get into later in this presentation, but disability is only one way in which we exclude people. I mean, there are any number of ways that we can, that exclusion is derived. Disability only being one of them. We have obviously, as we all understand from the racial justice, protests and arguments and around the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. These are the things that have been the topics, apart from COVID, of the last couple of years. And so the idea of simply of saying, like, we're going to focus on inclusion, and inclusion is only going to be about disability, is not something that we can think about. The issues that involve these kinds of exclusion tend to be a lot deeper and more entrenched and harder to tease out. And this is one of the things that we teach in inclusive design, so that people can kind of start to understand how someone's race, how someone's gender, how someone's economic status, their language, how literate they are, where they are in the world, how that there's so many different variables in people's lives that are vectors for being excluded from a given experience. And so thinking about that idea of how can we put people together to get them to see these these kinds of issues, and to see them through an intersectional lens. We have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but we don't have a racial accessibility guidelines, or a gender accessible guidelines, or an LGBTQ accessible guidelines. Those don't exist because they don't present the kinds of barriers that we think of technically. And disability itself has social order issues that need to be resolved. Now, when I'm going to go back to this because I left out kind of the progress slide of this. All of these things intersect, right? So Kimberly Crenshaw taught us, coined the term intersectionality, to say that in her own writing, the idea of her race and her gender as a Black woman created entirely different forms of exclusion from being a Black man or a white woman, and pointed to sort of going into a factory and saying that because there was a Black man and a white woman there, that a Black woman could not possibly be excluded from the same experience. So understanding that all of these things go together in various different in various different capacities to create that exclusion. And so when we take just one piece of that and say, this is what inclusion is to me, that we take the things that are only our identity and say, like, well, everybody else can worry about theirs. That's not inclusion. That's self-advocacy, and that's important, but that's not inclusion. That's not inclusion. Is about bringing everybody in, not just about representing your own particular point of view. So when this is the question that I ask to sort of set up people to show what they the anti-patterns of inclusion. So does your organization know its users? Hear this all the time from people when we start talking about broadening the space of who we are bringing in for user interviews, focus groups, for usability tests. when we're expanding the sets of users by geography or by disability, or any of these cases where we're bringing users that don't click in a product team's head as being their users. Our users are usually just reflections of ourselves and our own needs and the things that we think we want to be able to do with the tools. And that's not design, that's self-design. Inclusive design is about getting in with not just the people that are using your system, but the people that want to be using your system, in order to get a much broader base of people that can use this product equitably. And it's not just about X's and O's, about the about the mock-ups of things. It's not about meeting some kind of technical standard. It's about thinking about all of the decisions that have gotten you to the point that you're at today, and determining what are the things that we can undo that are constraining the capability of the people to use our products. One book that covers this in a great detail, and this is kind of cited in a lot of the materials, training courses. We talk about it in the Adobe Inclusive Design workshop. Kat Holmes from Salesforce wrote a book called Mismatch that refers to this book. It's called The End of Average. And so Todd Rose has a story in this that is about fighter pilots in the 1940s and into the 50s. They were crashing, and many of them were dying at a fairly alarming rate. At one point, there were 16 pilots that crashed in a single day. And what they had done was that they had built those first cockpits of the fighters based on a set of measurements, just anthropometry, measuring people's bodies, and how far the average person can reach, and what their physical dimensions were, etc. And what they found was, in actual fighting or flying situations, that they were unable to be able to eject themselves from from planes, or be able to pull maneuvers in actual dogfighting situations. And so they went back, and a researcher went and looked at the same cohort of pilots, and found that if you took any 10 of these measurements, none of them actually fell in the middle of all of those, in that 50th percentile, that one standard deviation of the center of that group. And so that idea of everybody fits on this bell curve, and we just kind of hit the one piece in the middle, falls apart at the first hurdle. We aren't all the same. We aren't even all that similar when we put people up against one another. And so all of these kinds of hacks of the 4-hour work week of just get the nut of things and forget everything else, that collapses, and you start to see how that kind of design just really built into the entrenched sets of biases and discrimination that permeates our society. And we can look at this as an example. Like, this is actually from a book called The Measure of Man and Woman, which was published in 1993. The original version was called The Measure of Man. And in this book, you see some of these. This is anthropometry. So this is the measure of all of the different kind of averages of a given human being. And what you see is, in the foreground, this is supposedly an average man, and in the background you see an average woman. And until this version of the book came out, only the man was driving. That the woman was always a passenger in this vehicle. And this was true in crash tests into the 80s, and were based on this is the only dummy that would be put in the driver's seat would be a 6-foot-tall man. This is actually the evolved version of this. So now you see that it's the 1% 1 percentile woman in size, and the 99th percentile of the U.S. population on for the man. So you have both the sizes, the extremes of this case, and also the idea that anybody can be driving. This is not something to be made light of. women are more likely to be in accidents, they're more likely to have serious injuries, and they're more likely to die in accidents. And the design of the vehicles is a contributing factor in that. There are cases in in medicine where this is a source of exclusion. There are cases in law where gender causes exclusion. And Antoinette Carroll from Creative Reaction Lab says all the time, these were designed and they can be undesigned. We can design a different future if we think about these things beforehand. And we start to see over the last decade that this is something that's coming to pass. And Facebook in 2014 introduced a field for customizing the gender. Didn't quite go all the way. When you create a Facebook account now, you actually you have to, last I checked, say that you're a man or a woman, and then when you've logged in, you can create the custom gender. So you're still misgendering yourself just to create the account. But once you get in there, you have a set of 70 odd gender identities where Facebook worked with trans, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people to come up with identities that resonated with them. So, and this is not just this is not a narrow segment. Even in 2018, Minnesota, those of you outside of the United States, Minnesota is a Midwestern state in the United States. 2.7% of Minnesota teens identify as trans or gender nonconforming. That's a large number. This is not something that's been coming and going. It's been something that generationally has been increasing over many years, and this is decades. And this is the idea of inclusive design. This is giving people agency and the ability to express themselves in the situations that they're in. Now, other ways that people can exclude are by race and skin tone, and I'll give you sort of an example about this using film as an analogy. A camera does not care about your race. The camera captures light and shadow and tone, and so it doesn't matter if you are from the south of India or from the center of Australia or Africa or the American South. If your skin tone is the same across all of those places, your face is going to be captured in a certain way using film. The creators of that film, however, can be racist, and in many cases, and Kodak is one of these examples. They were not looking at the audience of Black photographers and Black models and subjects in the film that they were creating. So this is known as a Shirley card. This was the way that you calibrated film from the 50s into the 1980s. And so film labs used this picture, and it was usually sort of a white lady with alabaster skin as the calibration photo for how a photo is supposed to be processed. It wasn't until the 1980s that a Black woman was put into the same kind of photo for capturing that. And when you think about the implications of that design decision on somebody's own family photographs, of not having someone's details captured, when even if there was a white woman in the same photograph, they'd be captured perfectly. That is a decision that is rooted in racism. In fact, Jean-Luc Godard actually referred to Kodak, refused to shoot using Kodak photography because he called it racist. So this is something that we have to think about, because we built cameras that privileged the capture of white skin. And in Japan, Fuji did the same thing with video cameras, sort of capturing the skin tone of Japanese news presenters, because that was the tone that they wanted to capture. When you think about things from one perspective, you get one result, and that one result does not necessarily translate more broadly. This becomes even more important when we talk about facial recognition, and in the United States, this is a bigger issue, and I can't even begin to get into the complications of AI and AI bias in this. But the important part about this is, when you have a database of faces in the United States that represent the United States population, the faces of Black and brown people are going to be in the minority. And when you put that into a database that is matching people on basically not, on traits that it is interpreting. It isn't saying the skin is this dark. It's looking at sort of pieces of the photo and trying to put things together. What ends up happening is that the faces become, the facial recognition systems are more likely to capture white men accurately, and that means that everybody else is less accurate. And where the rubber hits the road here is that facial recognition applications targeted toward white people are more about buying things, right? Finding people in a store and making things easier to purchase. And when they are targeted toward Black and brown people, it is used more likely as law enforcement, a law enforcement tool. And it's misinterpreted. It's caused people to have their doors broken into incorrectly because that recognition is wrong. And so the gravity of giving people a tool that can actually put them in jail or put their lives in danger because you haven't understood the intricacies of the social application of that is something that we as designers we don't necessarily create that, but through our inaction and our ignorance of this kind of subject, we can definitely allow those things to happen. And any number of companies have these kinds of databases, and we don't know whether these things have been taken into account. Now, another example of this is, if you look at this photo, this is a 32 by 32 pixel image of a face, and there was an algorithm last year called Pulse that was intended to create a high resolution image from one of these smaller images. And for those of you that can see this screen right now, the vast majority of you probably have already recognized that this is a pixelated image of Barack Obama. And so when you take this and put it into high resolution using all of this facial data that's built up in this database, what do you get? Random white guy. This is the problem, right? It is trying to capture this data, and it is heavily skewed toward white faces. There are tons of different projects that are working on this kind of bias, but some of it is just baked in. Some of these databases don't just need to be evaluated and modified and helped. They've been sort of built on top of one another. And sometimes we need to throw it away and start over again just in order to even contemplate the ability of to have a more equitable system. Now that's just, that's the high end of inclusion that we can think about, but we also have kind of the basics. And so if you're a graphic designer and you want to create something that, for example, Adobe stock will sell, here's an image that's in our database, and it says, "Happy Holidays and a joyful New Year." And if you look at all of the imagery that's behind it, is there anything that says Kwanzaa about this to you? Is there anything that says Hanukkah about this to you? Is there anything that says Yule? Well, okay, Yule. But in the majority of these images, you are seeing Christian iconography, and obviously this is just Merry Christmas with some other thing. This is not cultural, representation. People don't feel that they're being, catered to in this. It's just not very thoughtfully done. And that's just one example. Like we have things like iconography. The International Commission for the Red Cross, created in the 1860s. And as soon as they went into Muslim majority countries with a red cross on a flag, that was a problem. That was a literal red flag. And so in the Middle East, those images are the sign for first aid in the Middle East, or the Red Cross is actually the Red Crescent. This is a decision that was made over 150 years ago. This isn't political correctness or anything. This is something that matters to people who feel excluded. We can make these decisions without screwing them up the first time. Another thing that we want to talk about is access to is economic status. There's a great book called Factfulness that talks about the divisions of who makes what kind of money around the world. And the population, out of almost 8 billion people, the population that make $1,000 per month is about 1 billion people. And so effectively, the vast majority of the people that we are thinking of bringing online, that participate in internet, e-commerce, etc., they're in that bucket, which means there's almost 7 billion people that aren't using computers and technology the way that we have. They may be more mobile oriented. They may not be connected at all. But we still have this idea that everybody just has the latest and greatest MacBook and iPad, and we're gonna focus on them as the user. And when we think about who we leave out because of that, there are people that are unbanked, so they can't get a credit or debit card without some kind of at least usurious interest rate or some other conditions that are going to drain them of money. The story of it's expensive to be poor, right? You don't have these kinds of firm access, ways to access your the money that you have, and so you're not able to buy or participate in the same way. If you're using a lab at a library versus in your own home, something that you control yourself, if you have any settings that you need, then you need to set them every single time that you log in, and that affects your ability to access things like assistive technology. So if you need to use a screen magnifier, if you need to have captions, all of these things really just depend on whether somebody that set up that computer thought to enable that for you. Another case of this, language and literacy. Here's another image from stock, and you can see, any of you that understand Arabic will see this immediately. This is marhaban in Arabic, except it's left to right and it's disconnected. So somebody just kind of cut and pasted all of these words from all of these different languages. And I'm sure if your first language is on this, you feel like, oh, that's very nice. I'm glad to be in Kuala Lumpur or whatever. But if you're an Arabic speaker, you're like, you really don't know what you're talking about. So this is another way that the people are excluded in these situations. Obviously, nobody talks to somebody that's an Arabic speaker to say, does this make you feel any better? You'd have gotten it. So your ability to understand a lot of this has to do with where you grew up, what languages you speak, and at what level, whether you can pay attention to long passages of text. Everything, including the words that I'm saying right now, have people who are not able to comprehend them in the way that it's presented. And so being able to adapt and being able to make things as simple as possible has a huge implication in how many people are actually able to interact with it. And this is the key part to understand. Even the most basic texts that we can think of are excluding people. The Old Man and the Sea, which is actually a very easy read. Hemingway meant for it to be a very simple read. Of adults in the United States, only 80% of the population can read it. Harry Potter, which is a children's book, is down to 66% of the population that can read that book. Tipping point, appropriately, 50-50. And then you can get into things like Jurassic Park, which is Michael Crichton. This is a mass market novel, and we're down to below 50% of the population. The adult population can read this, and then down to an academic paper. So 8% of the population can read an academic paper in the United States. The literacy level is substantially lower than a lot of people understand, and it causes you to have to think about how you're creating that content. And then age. This is Paula Scher, the principal at Pentagram. She's 72 years old. And this is what I tell all of the designers that come through our program. We've trained all of them on this work. When is the appropriate time for me to take your tools away from you? And you can just hear the air go out of the room on this, because nobody would go to Paula Scher and say, I'm sorry, we just can't make something for you anymore. But what happens as you age? Your vision will start to, you might have astigmatism. There's a condition called presbyopia, which kind of onsets in the 40s and 50s, where you start to get farsighted. So you see people like holding their phones further away from them. Sort of arthritis can set in, you start to lose high frequency hearing. All of these things are natural parts of the aging process. And if we don't account for them, we might design ourselves out of our own tools. So this is like why these differences matter, and why I get into this before I get into talking about disability specifically, is because this is about who has access to employment, who can have and maintain a job, who can get an education, who can participate in commerce and their government and their community, and all of these labels, and again, these all overlap and intersect as well. It matters to talk about these things because they entail exclusion. We don't need to worry about these things if everybody's on an equal playing field, but the fact is that's not true. And that's why we start talking about inclusive design. Now, getting into disability, like this is this is a book called Everyone Here Spoke Sign Language. It's about Martha's Vineyard, and particularly a village called Chilmark on Martha's Vineyard in the Northeast United States. That is about hereditary deafness. So for centuries, there was a Martha's Vineyard sign language that everyone used because there was such a high population of deaf people on the island that you needed to be able to sign in order to communicate with everybody. And so someone's physical disability or limitation was not the cause of exclusion in this small space, which is to say, you can make something that is inclusive of people with disabilities if you are engaging and working to make sure that everyone has an equal footing. This is the basis of the social model of disability, which is one of a number of different models, and the identity model of someone with a disability being able to talk about both the good and the bad of their own disability. It's kind of at the top of the list here, but understanding that this isn't a medical condition, this isn't a pity situation, this is something that we as designers have the ability to make at least less of an issue if we think about it beforehand. When we start talking about disabilities, we have this idea of going immediately to the extremes. Like and I'm most of the way through this presentation and I haven't talked about blindness. And I think a lot of you probably heard accessibility and they're like, great, I'm gonna learn about screen readers and stuff. Okay, later. But not the first thing. And the reason that this happens, especially with designers, is because designers tend to be more visually centric. Like they think that this is a visual medium that they're working on, if it's the web or an application. And the reality of it is far more diverse than that. And there are lots more people that are being left behind than simply people that are blind and using a screen reader. And to give you an example of this, for hearing impairment, the idea of someone being totally deaf and having been deaf from birth is really inaccurate. Most people lose their hearings at some point, in their childhood or later in life through some kind of illness or injury. And so of the people who have some kind of hearing impairment, like hearing that cannot be corrected to what is medically the normal range, only 10% of them are deaf in both ears. Another sort of 15-20% are considered to be deaf as in below certain thresholds of hearing. And then you have this large population, 70% of these people are classified as hard of hearing. So they have some residual hearing. They have grown up with hearing as their, and speech as their primary communication. But just make captions leaves out one group of people. Just do sign language leaves out another subset of that population. And so it requires a lot more thinking about this than like a little check mark. We're going to do this. We're going to do captions just for deafness. This is not a mistake. Talking about the idea of blind from birth, we're talking 0.1% of the people that have a visual impairment. And I don't mean me. I'm corrected to 20/20 vision. I mean people whose vision cannot be corrected to 20/20. 0.1% of blind people are blind from birth. So you have about 10% of the visually impaired population are legally blind. So their vision is not correctable to the big E on the eye chart, the 2200 vision. And then you have this other 90% of the population that are that range from kind of squinting just because they can't get like can't get exactly the detail that they want, to verging on legal blindness. So it's a very diverse set of users that we're talking about here, and this is true for all different kinds of disability. So when you think about disability, especially in the context of all of the other kinds of identities that we were talking about here, these are all just kind of like a soundboard with 1,000 sliders. And all of these are on a much bigger scale than most people ever really imagine or can contemplate. And they can change over the course of a day. There are things like multiple sclerosis, where somebody can lose part of their vision in one eye and have it come back over a day or a week. These things can change. As somebody's arthritis can act up. Like it isn't just this extreme of like you can do this or you can't. Because if you think about just getting into cognitive disabilities and the ranges that are involved there, there's no line that's clear about disability, and a lot of us benefit from from this at one point or another without ever really recognizing the disability in ourselves. So I'm going to wrap up with just like some ideas, just some things to kind of dig into in the like designing for disability area. A Braille display is one of them. Like it's really important to understand that a non-visual user experience is fundamentally different from the visual one. You don't have this visible space that you can refer to immediately. You have a sequence of items that you have to move back and forth through in this. And so when you're laying out a user experience for, when you're doing a screen in Adobe XD or whatever else tool you use, the order is not instantaneously decipherable to somebody that's implementing that. You need to be able to communicate, this is the order that I intend this to be rendered, because a Braille display and a screen reader user are going to use these things completely differently. Screen readers are on pretty much any smart device that you have here, from an iPhone or an Android device on up. So you can actually play around with some of this stuff yourself. But turning on VoiceOver on iOS actually changes the way the digitizer, the screen works. You're moving left and right between items by gesture. You have all of these 1, 2, 3, 4 finger gestures that are on top of this that allow people to scroll page by page. They can move their finger over the screen and have it read out the contents of the screen. There are all of these different modes of screen readers, and it's a real rarity to find a designer that's actually like sort of dug into a lot of that material, just so that we can, so that we can get into some detail about how people work with it. So learn about how some of these tools work. Single switch device is another great example. This is something that in iOS, again, you can play with just with the camera. By tilting your head left and right, you can actually use that as a single switch, just finding that in the accessibility section of the settings. In Stephen Hawking's case, he used his cheek he would twitch his cheek, so this cheek muscle would be the signal that he would send to the display, the communications device that was in front of him. And so that was the way that he communicated. So like anything that you can do with a single switch, and that can be like tapping your knee, moving your head, blinking an eye. You can do brain waves if you want to, and that's enough to control something like an on-screen keyboard. And this is built into the to the tools that we have here. Predictive text. So what you rely on to to shorten up your typing on on your phone, or do some kind of like predict the next word meme. That came from the accessibility world. This was something that was made for things to be easier for an on-screen keyboard user to type long passages of text. This works with an on-screen keyboard. It scans a row at a time. You select the row, and then it moves left to right. It can be very slow, but when it is the most efficient mechanism for doing that, it's an amazing tool. And then speech recognition. We have these voice assistants that I'm like, which one do I have in this room? I have a Google one, so if I were to say, Alexa, do this or that, right, I normally would have something that like yells at me. But that idea of intents, of being able to trigger something in the world to happen by your voice is something that also came from the accessibility world. This is something that we're going to evolve into, and already voice control in iOS as an example, the voice support on on Android is actually coming along really quickly as well. This is something that I think is going to merge, and so thinking about the implications of that as well is something that you can keep in mind as a designer. And last but not least, this is something that comes in every operating system, and designers usually hate it. And it's the idea of being able to set the fonts to be larger and to set the contrast to be higher, to be able to change the colors. This is the Windows 10 dialog that shows all of the built-in options for managing things like text hyperlinks, disabled text, etc. And these are really important to be able to support. So now we've built these things into things like our Spectrum design system, so that if you're on Windows 10 and using the Edge browser to use our content, if your high contrast or large fonts mode is enabled, we will re-render the design of our application to support it. It's the user's intent that matters, not how cool your dark gray on light gray or vice versa kind of interface is. These are things that were meant to get around a lot of really bad design decisions that impact people and their color vision or their visual acuity in these applications. So I just want to close with sort of the definition of inclusive design from the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University in Toronto. And it is design that considers the full range of human diversity with respect to ability, language, culture, gender, age, and other forms of human difference. It's everything that makes us different that we need to think about. And when you start from that we know our user perspective, you'll never get there, because you're only focusing on narrower and narrower and louder sets of users. So I'm gonna stop here, and I can sort of start with Q&A, and I can seed the questions if there are any more that are there. But thank you for coming, and yeah, happy to take it from there.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, that was fantastic, and I want to learn even more. I was just trying to find out from our audience who is interested in learning about a career path in accessibility versus actual accessibility practices, because I'm watching you teach all these practices and I'm like, wow, I want to keep learning more about that. But of course there's like endless stuff to learn. Okay, here we go. Let's stick to plan and talk about that, about the career path a little bit, and just what brought you into working on accessibility as your main career path, because you've been involved in it for a long time. So
yeah, the first place that I worked on accessibility was an online grocery site in 1999, and it was about the time the first web content accessibility guidelines had come out. I think maybe a few months before or after that. But we had a customer that called and said, I'm blind and I want to be able to buy groceries, and explain to us the difference in experience. And I think that kind of carries through to today for me, because it was the first opportunity that I thought that through designing more inclusively, I could take someone's 3 or 4 hour ordeal of hiring paratransit and calling a grocery store or something down into something that is a 10 or 15 minute thing, right? That enables someone's days of someone's year by thinking about it that way. And the tools were not great for us to be doing that, but just it was hearing that feedback and just like like, oh, we were doing this stuff for, Richie rich like families to not have to go to the grocery store. But there was the potential for it to be so much more, and
It's like
that led to
pre-Instacart.
way pre Instacart.
Pre Instacart. Okay. Let's and so basically you were filling a need that you really believed in and you thought that it needs to be addressed. And it's so wild how big the accessibility is like baked into design systems now, and a really just like a core part of a company. And some companies I've seen get sued over not having accessible products. So it's really important that designers consider it not just accessible but also inclusive, make sure that they can reach as many people as possible, and consider as many users and different types of people as possible.
Yeah.
Okay, so I also wanted to ask you before we go into the audience Q&A about how your day-to-day practices are like at Adobe, and how you work with the team to make a more inclusive and accessible experience, whether it's product or actually within the business part of hiring.
Yeah. So we started first by when I came into the design organization after working in the accessibility organization for about 10 years. And the thing that drove me to that was basically that we had been doing trainings with all of these other role players in the company, and once we got to design, we realized just how fundamentally different it was. We can't just give people technical advice when they're creating an application that doesn't yet exist. So there's no point in doing this, because there's no artifact that can be measured. Right? So that you're starting from nothing in a lot of these cases, and if we wait until there's an artifact to measure, we're not going to have an accessible result because we never thought about it. So that completely changed the way that we approach it from the design perspective. And so the first thing that we did, even before I joined the design organization, was focus on the design system. So Spectrum, the Adobe design system, has as its first principle inclusive design. So every component that's added to the Spectrum core needs to have its accessibility well defined. So keyword shortcuts and accessibility APIs, and the way that these things work in context with one another. So you have these accessible building blocks that are going to be used to build the applications, and that's high. That's a high reward activity, and it takes a ton of time, because you now are working the design system into applications. And so I think a lot of people sort of see what we're doing, and it's like, where's the accessibility on this? There are dozens of teams that have been just gradually working it in, but there's working with teams on how to implement that. We work with the accessibility team on standardizing that, or the technical aspects of that approach. We have an inclusive researcher, Molly Bloom, who has built a guide with some other folks in the industry that's now out on Medium. I can probably find the link for that.
That would be great. Yeah.
For recruiting and preparing people for user interventions, and day of event accommodations, and all of the things that you need for capturing and integrating the feedback that you get when you are doing inclusive research. So we need to have we need everything to kind of be in place as we work with product teams, so that they know that we're doing this stuff, and that to a certain extent it's not a question, it's a thing that we do.
It's like, it's not an option, it's basically baked into like the product design experience. And and for most of my career, it's a lot of what we do is
is advocacy, right? We're trying to find work in our organizations that is going to come to fruition. And for what we're doing, we need to make sure that it's actually going to happen, because you just can't keep selling and selling and selling and nobody's buying. That there needs to become a standardized way of interacting between the design team and the product team, or within that team, so that everybody knows that they have a role to play in that inclusion. And that changes a lot. That makes it very contextualized to different teams. How far along are you in this process? Like, how mature are you at the work that you're doing? So there's a lot to consider in it. It requires kind of knowing where people are at and how far you can get them to go in the next iteration. And that
Okay.
It's.
Well, I have a question for you. Yeah, we have an audience question for you. Well, here, actually, they're asking about inclusive and accessibility practices. Product is everyone's business, so more insights would be fantastic. There was one that you mentioned about, like, what are some ways that you measure whether or not a product is accessible? What are some tools that you use?
Yeah, so we have an entire organization that's dedicated to that. So Adobe Accessibility focuses on the more practical aspects of it. So we have accessibility conformance reports that are on the website for every product that we make, that give people an honest view of where we're at, and we're brutally honest about the capabilities and limitations. And a lot of companies they need to publish those. I mean, they need to have those documents. They don't usually publish them, but sometimes it's kind of products just kind of stagnate. They never actually get any better. We also have policies in place to say, here are the things that you need to do in next year's releases to get to a better level for this. So
what are some of those
executive ranks?
Sorry, I'm gonna cut in.
Yeah.
What are some of the tools that you use to measure, that they use to measure accessibility within their team?
Yeah, we have relationships with some automated tools. I don't want to.
You don't have to say that exact.
It's not my, yeah. So we have engineers and product managers that are specialized in accessibility. They use a variety of tools, like both sort of in-browser evaluation tools. They use there are a couple of different online evaluation tools that have automated components that can make things go faster. That can also help us find, sort of from release to release, whether we've improved or regressed in that. So QA tools are important, but obviously not sufficient. They capture maybe 40% of what you actually need to be looking for. And so that's kind of the line between accessibility and inclusive design as far as accessibility is concerned, that you can meet the standard, the technical standard of this through engineering and by hacking things together, but you can also have a terrible user experience in doing that. And so what we want is for both of those things to be happening. And you only do that by thinking about disability and working with disabled users in the design process. So, I'm really trying to kind of expand the potential, universe of users that can use our product, and the accessibility team kind of brings that down into one thing that everybody can use.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned something that you have to actually try and use use the screen reader, not just watch some, but how do you use the screen reader? How do you find people to be able to test with a screen reader? How do you find people to be able to test your products with a screen reader?
Yeah, so there's a combination of that. So our researcher Molly has relationships with with a number of organizations to bring people in, and there are, I will mention names here. we have two organizations that we've worked with, AccessWorks and Fable, that have, you know, like a directory of users with certain disabilities, and they can help get you off the ground in finding users. But what you really want is to find your users, like the people that want to use your system. If I have somebody that doesn't care about video production, I'm not going to get what I need from their feedback when I know that there are, for example, you know, blind videographers, right? They're blind documentarians, and I want to get their feedback on that. And or someone that's hard of hearing and wants to look at the captioning support that we have in there. So you really need to establish better relationships with people that are actually already in your ecosystem, because usually they tend to be drowned out because they're edge cases, right? They're already marginalized in this process, and it's really trying to find and convince them that you're going to carry their voice forward, so that they're not really just wasting their breath. So it is a very subjective, contextual relationship that you need to establish to get the right kind of information.
Yeah, and it's like sensitive too. It's also but however, my mom can actually text now because she uses the voice command, voice to text to speech, or speech to text. Well, she couldn't do it before, but it would be like a bunch of mistakes. But now it's like a bunch of mistakes and a big run-on that actually is more accurate because of, I guess, machine learning. But okay, so we have Ben. We're featuring our guests here, and they're asking questions. I'm curious, but what would you say to someone who needs to be convinced of the importance of taking the time to design for accessibility and inclusivity? How do you justify it as a business decision? This is
I don't.
Good question.
I mean, this is what I tell accessibility advocates in particular, because there are 1,000 different business cases for accessibility. One of the first things that I was brought in on when I worked at the Web Accessibility Initiative at W3C was the business case, and I'm like, you're not business people. And designers aren't business people either. Unless you have an MBA and you can start talking about the numbers. But the one that really gets me is total addressable market, because they see these numbers and it's like $13 billion of disposable income. Well, or $13 trillion of disposable income among disabled people in the United States, or something like that. And that's a ginormous number to lay people, right? to people that don't have MBAs. Total addressable market doesn't mean anything if you can't tap into it, and that's what executives care about. So, dressing up like an exec or a business person and to make that case just doesn't work a lot of the time, and so I discount the idea that the business case is going to do it. In Adobe's case, we have a well-defined set of values that drive our company. And it's easy enough for me to go at this stage. Of course, I've done all of the advocacy moving through the organization. Do you want to live those values or not? And that's kind of the point where things are actually going to happen, because you can't keep fighting the most basic cases of these because people are just inclined to say no. You need to build a kind of a base of support and find sponsors that that are high up in the organization to back you up on all of this. And a lot of people go well, that I tried that with all of the people, and honestly, I talk to people in office hours every week that are asking what they do with their career, and my advice to a lot of them is don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. If you are working at an organization that doesn't value accessibility, and you value accessibility, or the same thing with inclusivity and equity, find another job. Don't try to, it's but and it sounds flip, and I know I'm a career designer, but the market ebbs and flows, and what I know is happening right now is that people are looking for someone that has that has a lens of inclusivity, that knows what accessibility is from the design perspective, as opposed to just leaving it to the engineers. And the way that you find those kinds of organizations is just by looking at who's talking about accessibility and how essential it is to the work that they're doing, and going and applying for for jobs, or getting or getting connected with people that do that work, because you will burn out if you're just the one person that's doing that accessibility work, and you turn your back and it's like a sandcastle. It just gets washed away after you turn around. Like I've been there, and I feel your pain. And you can't. It's unsustainable to say I'm going to take this whole thing on my back. And I'm not saying like you can just get a job 2 weeks from now, but you can say I don't want to spend that kind of energy in an organization that's not going to give that energy back.
I agree. Somebody who, like, they need to look at their values also, but also with like maybe a smaller organization, some of that would be like self-educating yourself as a designer and learning how to like create, for enough contrast and like voice inputs and like educating yourself, so that way you just reach a bigger market because they have more options of interacting with your software. So it totally makes sense. And I totally agree with you. I think if you have to spend all the energy like trying to persuade somebody, it's like, well, is this worth it? Should I look for something else that I'm more value aligned with? So you have a really good point, Matt. Okay, so here we go. Given Dahlia asks, given that there are so many intersectionalities, how do you ensure that you're recruiting for diversity within disability, race, etc.? Interesting.
Yep, good question. And that's I'm looking at we're just going to a group and saying, like going to each sort of individual group, like the National Federation of the Blind, for example, or the League for Hard of Hearing. The individual groups are not. I mean, they're united around a single identity. There's a lot more to it, and that's another one of the advantages of finding of building your own connections among your own users. It's and also there are other kinds of identity issues that are involved in there. It's, if you take that AI bias situation, it's more or less that in a microcosm. As you build this database, if you have 80 people in it, and one of them is South Asian, and then you're recruiting for South Asian people, you're going to feel like that's going to be the one user. And so it's harder for, I think, a smaller organization to be capturing like large numbers of users and being like very hands-on with that. It's a little easier for us because we have hundreds of millions of users, and it's really going into communities and asking those questions. And we have gotten quite a bit of backlash for doing that, because I don't know if you know this, but saying in a public channel, we really want to hear from women and people of color, and that like white guys are like, well, guess they don't care about me anymore. And literally, we've gotten that kind of feedback. But yeah, we do want to hear from people that aren't white guys that are complaining on Reddit, or like, not to say that they might not have feedback, but like, your feedback has been processed, dude. Like, there's a lot that we already know, and we can get into this kind of this negative feedback loop of only getting to the loudest the people in that system. It really requires kind of, in some cases, like a deep space telescope. you need to be able to focus outside of the noise and look at people that are actually out there saying this doesn't work for me. This isn't the experience that I want and need. Another piece of that is looking outside of North America. There are Microsoft is doing is building facilities in Africa and conducting research. I know a couple other companies that have like taken their people and gone to Thailand and done research there, and that like on the ground issues of inclusivity are the important part, of that. So I think it requires an investment in doing that work, and it's really never ending. But when you say, you have citizenship here, like you have a voice that we want in the conversation, you start building the kinds of relationships where you can have that kind of inclusivity, not just within an identity, but across them.
Yeah, like you actually build more inclusive life, like have more diverse people in your life, I guess, would help you recruit more people, more diverse people, I guess. But okay, so do we have any more questions from the audience? I have a question, which is for Matt, and that is what is a common practice that you see designers make, a common error that you see designers make as far as accessibility goes? I know it's kind of broad.
This is going to sound like a dig, and it's not. The things that I see people focus on most commonly are color contrast and color vision deficiency, so color blindness. And the reasons for that are that they are the most easily measurable design problems, right? That's and so it's easy to fall into this trap of going like, well, I dealt with color, I'm done, and there's so much more to get into, and thinking about that non-visual user experience, about how somebody would encounter a screen magnifier where you're only really seeing like a 1/16 of the screen, and it's and it's moving around. So how do you identify the focal point that somebody should be moving to? Like, there are things that people just don't know about those experiences, because they're kind of fixated on everybody has a keyboard and a pointing device on the screen, or maybe a digitizer, right? And so they have this like desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, right? Those are the form factors. And when you start bringing in, not just across disability, but sort of across geography, this is now starting to like homogenize worldwide. But the mobile user experience in like Japan and Korea especially was dramatically different not very long ago, in terms of just how everything worked. Like the IME, so the Asian language like typing experience was different. The size of the phones that people preferred was different, partly because of like convenience and partly because it was a lot of people's like principal computing device. And all of that is kind of merged, and we kind of have these these two major dominant systems in it. But we can't just say everybody's got a MacBook Pro M1 and iPad Pro M1 and an iPhone 12 Pro, and let's go. It requires people to understand that there's a whole bunch of things that get plugged into devices that are necessary, and especially when you get into those Braille displays, for example. Like a 40-cell Braille display is like $3,000. So it's not just kind of a nice to have, like, oh, they can use voice. Well, A, what if you're deafblind? And B, what, if somebody came to Adobe and we said like, sorry, your $600 video card is not supported, they would blow a gasket. But to say somebody's $3,000, Braille display is not supported, like that somehow is fine. Like it's that inequity that just sort of shows how unfair that that is. And we need to understand structure at its base. So so long story short, stop thinking so much about color and start thinking more about structure. How do these things go together? How are they ordered? What is what kind of control are you creating so that you can communicate that to a screen reader user? And in your own content, there's you can do this. Like TikTok is one of the content in TikTok is actually some of the most inclusive, accessible content that's out there, and most of it was not TikTok's doing. People are captioning their own stuff because largely deaf activists were like, we need captions, give us captions, and started hitting the real influencers in that space and building on it. You can do this stuff on your own. Having captions and doing and putting alt text in all of the work that you do is something that a lot of engineers just can't weasel their way out of. So there are some kinds of, if you're in that space where you feel like you're the one that's doing all of the work, there are some things that you can sneak in there that are hard to take out, and labeling your controls and doing alt text on your images is definitely one of those can be a subversive.
I love the alt text on the images. That's it makes sense though, because it's what is an interface? An interface is just content. And Andy Belfill from, he also works at Adobe. He gave a talk more recently about writing is designing, and he showed us an example of having an interface without any words at all. And it was just the interface is most of the writing is most of the interface. It's but then a lot of actually I've seen Webflow, they ask you to go ahead and describe what they just use the alt tags more descriptively, and a lot of the software, I feel like even WordPress, it's they're encouraging more people to fill out more information. Twitter does that as well.
Yep.
Here we have a question from Kristen, who is also a former Adobe contractor like myself. I know Def shows captions. Well, what is that? I don't know what that means, but I know Def shows captions or blinds using the tab key. Wait, hold on. Voice out accessibility. I'm not sure.
I can't parse this.
Yeah.
Kristen, can you rephrase that?
Let's try and rephrase it. Yeah. Showing captions, blind using. Okay, so she's basically saying key controls, and I'll let her rephrase it, and then we'll.
Yeah. I will say, just as far as the basics of sort of doing your own accessibility work, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of them have alt text spaces for for people to put alt text. So any moving image you can do that in. If you're creating video content, do that before it's published. You can burn it in using a lot of tools that are out there right now. And if you don't have the time or patience or skill to put that together, there are video tools that will do it for you. Some of which are sort of meant for creating Instagram or TikTok content. There are sites like otter.ai that will do it in an automated fashion. Rev has an automated tool for doing that. It's not that expensive. I have an Otter account that I use just for quick and dirty do captions. It costs me $10 a month. I get 6,000 minutes or something like that. I get more time than I could possibly use. I can also use it to to transcribe Zoom meetings, things like that. So there's a ton of capability that we that can be built into these just any kind of content that you're creating. Designers prototyping accessibility for deaf people. Sorry, reading Kristen's question here.
Oh yeah. And she also mentioned that you answered some of the question from before as well. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so there's and there's kind of another layer to this. There's the level of accessibility that is kind of the standard. There's the U.S. law, 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, CVAA, and it is built around around requiring captions. This is like if you see captions now in in-game chat or in videos in video games, all of that is legally required under CVAA. And so tools exist for that, like for that kind of content. And then there are kinds of implications for 3D video. So let's say you're in or VR, you're in a VR space and there are voices that are talking. How do you indicate who's speaking in a gaggle of people, and where do you display the captions so that they're not like sort of disrupting somebody's ability to move through space? Like imagine tripping over captions. So there's some things that you have to think about, and not only like this isn't designing for deaf or hard of hearing users. This is where you bring people in and you get their feedback on. Do you want 3 captions laid out on the floor every 120 degrees? Do you want there to be like word bubbles that appear over somebody's head that that show where they're talking? Do you want to be able to see what somebody 100 feet away is saying? So there are those kinds of applications. And then there's kind of some next generation stuff that's possible with captions. And by next generation, I've actually seen a demo of this almost 20 years ago. Not just the captions, but how do you communicate the emotion behind the captions? So being able to show like scary text or be able to change the appearance of the text. And then there's the matter of sign language and sign as the principal language of the app. And I think Kristen, I saw was scrolling past, was mentioning kind of deaf creators on TikTok. Like deaf TikTok is lit. Like there is so much content in like among deaf creators on Twitter. And I've learned more by kind of watching that content as it even just as it scrolls past about deaf identity and how people want to be able to like how people want to be represented in the tools that are available. So it's this is the case where the medium makes things better. That when you have something where people can participate in equitably, you get a lot more diverse, more interesting content.
I love it. I think Kristen had a follow-up question, which is about how do you prototype accessibility for blind people? And also to follow up with that, I don't know if I can attach a question to that, but like in terms of like voice UIs, have they become more of an asset to people who cannot see, or and has it improved the technology drastically over the past few years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the voice world has. It's actually the other way around. Like I said, it was originally made as assistive technology, right? So the text to speech and speech to text were both part of the Kurzweil snail mail reader. You would feed a sheet of paper that you got in the mail through a scanner, and it would do optical character recognition, and then it would synthesize that text for you. So that was a blind assistive technology that Ray Kurzweil invented in the 1970s. OCR, speech synthesis, voice recognition, tons of hands-free interaction modes for things that we're just starting to do. Those were all disability-related features before it became Siri, right? Like so. Sorry.
Oh, did you say it?
Like, what?
I know.
I have like 5 things that I'd be like, sorry, did you say my name? But and that's part of the message that we need to get out. Is like there's this reputation that accessibility is like holding people back because we can't do all of the new cool stuff. We are the new cool stuff. We made this, you know, all of these features that people take for granted. So it's really now coming full circle because you have things like you know, Alexa controls things throughout the house. So you know, not just being able to read your Audible book on your Alexa device, but being able to control, you know, the temperature in your house, because there aren't a lot of, you know, talking thermostats, for example. But there, you know, I have thermostats that are connected to my you know, voice assistant, so I can say set the living room to 67 degrees or whatever, and it will do it. But again, there's that gravity of I literally can't access these physical controls, but now I can just do it using my voice. That helps a ton of people to do that. There's a great video from, I want to say it was WWDC 2016, that shows kind of that trajectory of the you know, the Apple Watch being used for for tracking wheelchair you know, riding, like of you know, sort of wheelchair racing, of being able to control the blinds using Siri, about, you know, like all of these different features that are built into Apple operating systems that that make people's lives easier. So yeah.
It makes, yeah, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you're disabled. It just means that you're not able to do something at the moment, or like maybe you just need a little bit more information from elsewhere. This is that's actually okay. So this is, I guess we have time for like one more question, but I do want to follow up actually with Kristen's question, because I think it's interesting about prototyping. Like, say that you're prototyping a user interface. And do you actually like, do you have like a place where an image would be, and then just like tell it to read copy out loud? How do you prototype specifically for blind people?
Yeah,
or people who have
question.
Reduced vision? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a tool in Adobe XD that, you know, outputs prototype content. And we've been working on tools for making sure that what we produce out of that is directly accessible. So, you know, it was basically just a canvas. We were drawing a picture of what was on, you know, of what was in the XD artboard. But we do need to be able to communicate the structure and not just the visual aspect of that. So you know, that's going through you know, an evolution of its own, and really that's the principle of inclusive design, that if you're going to show a mock-up, right, a high fidelity prototype of something, it really should not just look but feel like the you know, like the finished product. So that's, you know, I think where that whole you know, UX design tool segment is going to need to go. And I think the best way to do that is, you know, you don't want to create a separate app for blind users anyway. You know, and obviously you know, we're talking about bringing in, you know, like engaging with blind and low vision users, you know, in the user testing of a given application, and not just like putting it through a screen reader and going like, that sounds okay. So the only real way to do that is by building it in a single unit, in something that adapts to all the different use cases that we were just talking about. And that I think is the best way to do it. If you're not to the point that you can do that, there are kind of, you know, I've seen people do basically like a card sorting exercise, but using HTML and, you know, just giving like lists and form items and things like that. So like a low fidelity visual, but a high fidelity structural version of an application. So if you know, and that might actually even help if you, like, depending on where you and the engineering team are at on this, that might actually help you figure out how that order is going to go together, because now you have this like HTML document that says, bang, here's the structure of this application the way that I want it to be, and that's what you build. You know, there's
like H1, H2 paragraph, all your semantic web is where it's at. So, but then we're talking about semantic app design. So it would be, but still, no matter what, it's very interesting stuff. Thank you, Matt, so much for coming by today and for sharing your ideas and your thoughts and your knowledge with us. You are awesome. I've learned a ton from you, and we have all really appreciated your time. Now, where can, if anybody wants to get in touch, I believe, well, actually, hold on, wait 1 second. We have at Matt May on Twitter, right?
Yep.
Okay, and you also get this other lower thirds right there. There you go.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there we go. And the other thing you can do, I have office hours that I post every week. So every Thursday, I do 30-minute calls with people who want to talk about their careers or about sort of applying inclusive design to the work that they're doing. So I do that on Calendly. So you can go to, it's calendly.com/mattmay/office hours. So I can, or just email me and I'll point you to it. My email is mattmay@adobe.com.
And then wait, I'm looking. Does that look right?
There you go. That's it.
There's one, and then we have the. Hey, that's so awesome that you're giving so much back to the design community, or I'll just say the tech community, because it's like people need guidance, and obviously you have experience in this industry, so it's really nice of you to, especially when you have you're like training all these people at Adobe and helping, it's like you're giving back so much. So definitely appreciate that and respect that.
It's something everybody needs to think about. Like, how are you going to empower the next generation of people? I think, especially early in my career, there are so many people that are just focused on their own self-preservation. Senior engineer that was like, "Get out of my face, kid." And now we have the accessibility community and the inclusive design community, and the intersection of the two of them. We constantly are sharing with one another. We're talking about the work that each other is doing, and sort of getting connected that way is a great way to see, just not even necessarily like, how am I going to get a job doing this thing, but how can I integrate this thing in the job that I'm doing?
I love that.
That's all good for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt May. Thank you so much. And everybody have a great night, and tune in next week. We'll have Peck from Impeccable giving a talk about how to build your own design agency and whether or not you should actually build your design agency. He'll give you tips on that. And Peck works with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies and helps them create user brand experiences. And he's very and they're like, "This is amazing, thank you." We have to put these on the screen just to say we have these are the kudos. Woohoo! Yeah. All right. I need the music. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for sticking around, and we'll see you next week on Thursday at Design Career Network. Don't forget to like this page, like this video, subscribe to us, share it with your friends. It helps us grow, and we love you. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and coming by tonight. Bye-bye.